Donna, thank you so much for being on my podcast. I am incredibly excited that you're here because, as I've already talked to you about, but what my listeners don't know is that what you provide today is a completely different point of view when it relates to attachment theory.
Yeah.
What's familiar to myself is my own upbringing and what it looked like to me, and ways in which it manifested in my life. You have
Mhm.
a completely different story to share, and I'm really excited to hear that story. But first, can you please introduce yourself to my listeners so that they know who I'm talking to today?
I'm happy to, and thank you very much for having me. My name is Donna Pope. My biggest claim to fame is that I am the adoptive mother of three now adults. I adopted two of my boys when they were infants, and then the third I adopted when he was 2 years old. And that adoption came about in part because I run an adoption agency called Heart to Heart Adoptions and have been doing that for about 30 years. And so I work with birth moms, I work with adoptive families, and I work with adoptees, as well as everybody else in the adoption community.
Wow, that's so rich. That's such a gift that you're working with. I mean, what was that like? What has that, I guess, career path is a right word here, or what has that career looked like for you?
Well, it wasn't my intended career path at all. I actually started out teaching and taught in secondary ed, and then I taught in higher education. And then I went back to get a PhD and started doing medical research. So that was my career path, was to do medical research, and did that for 10 years. And in the process of doing medical research, I it's hard to say I got bored, but I felt my sister was involved in adopting children because she couldn't have children.
Mm.
And so in the process of helping her find agencies and situations, I became pretty familiar with the adoption community. And there were some things about it that I didn't feel comfortable with. And so decided to start an agency. And so that was back in 1998. And I've been doing it ever since.
Right.
We started and we do about 100 adoptions, anywhere from 70 to 100 adoptions a year. We work
Wow.
with um, tens of thousands of birth mothers and thousands of adoptees and tens of thousands of adopted families. So I've become quite familiar with sort of the feelings of those people. I
Yeah.
guess one of the things that is important for you in this is that having done it now for 30 years, and especially having raised my own children,
Mm.
um, I'm very familiar with some of the feelings of adoptees. And
Right.
that's where the issues of attachment manifest themselves, especially.
Yes, and I'm super curious about that. Can you share a little bit about what, I guess you probably have so many different experiences and there's probably layers to this and it's a lot to go down. But what are some of the main points that you want people to take away from some of the stories that you know?
Yeah, and I guess one of the things we might want to back up and make sure that people understand attachment.
Hmm.
Um, and perhaps your audience and everybody does, but attachment, th there's multiple different kinds of styles, but in general, attachments are secure. That's where the child feels very securely attached to their parents. There's an anxious attachment is the second one, and they're not sure exactly how they're supposed to feel about their parent. There's an avoidant attachment where they're trying to stay away from their parent, and there's a fearful attachment. Those are kind of basic styles, but then people anxious avoidant attachment is a classic style. It kind of comes from I guess one of the best ways to talk about attachment is if you were to take a group of children and then you put them in a room and their parents were there and they're playing, they're just having a good time, and then their parents, whoever their parent is, leaves the room, and they might give them a hug and say, "I'll be back in a little while," and then they'll leave the room. And so if you observe those children, you might see that some of the kids get very upset when their parents leave.
Mm.
Some of the kids might just not even notice that their parent left. And some of them might just be fine. And that kind of shows you something about their attachment. But what's more interesting is how they respond when the parent comes back. And when the parent comes back into the room, some of the children will go over, oh, mom, mom, and they'll hug them and be happy. Others of them will ignore their parents when they come back, and others of them will actually be angry when their parent comes back. And so observing the different attachment of each of the children gives you sort of an idea of how their attachment is to their parents. Did you want to say something about that, Maggie? You know attachment better than I.
Yes, I mean, I don't know that I know it better than you. And also what I love that because I said introductory too, that you're bringing a different perspective. And I mean, this is more the relationship between a child and their parent, which is so it kind of where it starts. So that's where it grows and that's where it's developed from. So very often when I talk about attachment theory, I talk about how it manifests in your love life and what it looks like when you're an adult and you're trying to pair up with another individual. That is the part that I'm talking about the most and the most familiar with. But I find this incredibly interesting. And as you're explaining this, I'm thinking that I wonder if you can help me unpack some of the things that I've been reflecting on because I I've always had my parents like physically present. I also had an incredibly close relationship with my mom. And I've had a troubling relationship with my dad because although he was always physically present, I never felt emotionally close to him. But if I was one of those kids in that room, I would have been the one that cried when my mom returned. And
Why?
I,
Why?
yes, that's what I was hoping you because there is a very specific event that happened in my life that I've actually never talked about on my podcast. And my mom and I talk about it sometimes because we're like, why did that happen? And essentially, what happened is that, like, the logistics around what happened is that I was 7 years old. I was going to go on a road trip with my grandpa and his wife because he's divorced from my grandma. And we were going to drive to Oslo, which was at that time about 7 hours away from home. So I'm 7 years old. And this is the first time ever in my life I'm going away for a week from my parents. And I think 2 days went by. And the moment I remember it was a Monday, and I got to talk with my mom on the phone. And it was as if this immense anxiety was rising in my body and I could not stop crying. I felt incredibly unsafe somehow and just out of place, very uncomfortable. And I was going to stay there for another 5 days. And I was crying absolutely every single day, many hours a day. And the only thing that I found comfort in was either talking on the phone with my mom, which wasn't 100% readily available, and it was reading the children's Bible. That was all I could find comfort in at 7 years old during that trip. And so when I came home from that trip, I could never sleep over at any of my friends until 4 years later. And it's like there was very much around this because I was incredibly attached to my mom from that moment on and completely unconsolable. I remember after that trip and I was going to go to school, I was crying every single day of the first days of school. Eventually, it got better. I would get hives all over my body as a reaction to the stress. And, but I've never been abused. I have a phenomenal relationship with my grandpa. I've always felt, I guess, like, I don't know, I never felt like an insecure kid or anything. So, this is a story that my mom and I look back at a lot and we're like, why did that happen? Why did I react that way?
That's really an interesting. And have you come to a conclusion?
I haven't. I still haven't. And don't get me wrong, like I I deep dive into the storylines of my life because I'm an analytical person. I want to understand everything because I don't know, it's a puzzle piece for me. And this is one of the ones that have been very hard for me to identify where it came from, but also because I became so clearly anxiously attached in my relationships with men. But my mother was the only one I felt that safe with. I never felt that safe with my dad. And I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but Yeah, it's definitely interesting. Have you seen any similar situations in your body of work and have some sort of theories as to what could have triggered that behavior?
Well, I don't know for sure. I'd have to know more about you and your relationship with your
Right.
parents to understand. But you've described an anxious attachment, is
Hmm.
what you've described. And the goal that we want to get to in all of our attachments is a
Hmm.
secure attachment.
Yeah.
And so what does a secure attachment look like? Well, if we go back to the kids, a secure attachment would be they feel comfortable that their parents are all going. They might be a little sad and say, "Bye, you're leaving." Oh, okay. But then they'd go back and play and whatever. And then when the parents came back, then they'd acknowledge, "Oh, you're back. Well, I'm glad." And that's secure in the attachment is what we want to get to as when we're kids. And we want
Hmm.
to get that to that when we're young. We want to get to it when we're old. We want to get to it in all of our relationships. And so the question is, how do we get to that point where we feel secure?
Yeah.
Well, if we look in adoption, one of the challenges of adoption is that there is a separation. So a child at some point, whether they're a baby or whether or not they're a little bit older, they are separated from their parents. And
Mm.
that separation creates terror. It,
Yeah.
it, it creates a feeling of I can't feel safe. Now, can adopted children feel safe in their adoptive family? Of course. And
Yeah.
and that absolutely happens. And but there is some thought that initial trauma of that separation when they're first born or maybe even later might have a residual effect.
Yeah.
Uh, but it can be healed,
Mm.
but it does need to be healed. And the question is, how do you heal it? Well, partly you acknowledge it, you see that that's what happened, and you talk through it, and you get to the point where you feel secure. I mean,
Right.
you think about your relationships with whoever your significant relationships is. You felt anxious.
Yeah.
You have you have felt anxious, and you think,
Yeah.
is this relationship going to last? Do I want it to last? How do I feel about it? How
Mm.
did you deal with that when you felt that way?
That's a very fun question. How I felt about it, I guess I also felt some sort of terror in my relationship right now. I let me put it like this. I've had a lot of what I call developing relationships because it have got me closer to the ultimate goal. For me, I it took me a very long time to just be honest about what I wanted, and I've reflected on that a little bit too because I am also a product of my time, which is women who are career chasers in many ways. But instinctually, what I wanted was to be a wife and a mom. And the most painful thing and the most time-consuming thing of my life was honing in on anything that had to do with love and my possibilities of getting closer to that goal. But I didn't know how to set boundaries and I didn't know how to hold boundaries because I was too fearful of being rejected. And if I got
Right.
rejected, I did, God forbid, I was going to lose them. So I latched on. So it took me a really hard time to understand that I needed to also embody a person who can hold their boundaries. And that took me many years. But it started with being honest about what I wanted and then understanding what is in between the version of me today and the version of me that has that. And that's where it all began. But what I'm also understanding is that a lot of it has to do with well, I also think a lot of it has to do with frequency, but that's kind of like a bigger conversation. But what I've learned is for every relationship I was in, it became easier for me to express myself. It became easier for me, especially the latest two relationships, like the one I'm currently in and the one that I was in prior. I felt safe to voice my desires. Although in the last one, I wasn't met on those desires, I still didn't feel defeated at the end of that, as if I had failed in love. There was like a long period of like 3 years with one of my exes that was the worst push and pull of my life where it completely got me to a breaking point where I just had so much knowledge and no agency and just completely hit rock bottom. Like it was terrible, but it taught me everything that I needed to know essentially. But today I feel safe asking for what I need, explaining why it's important to me, but I'm also curious about how I can be of service to my partners so that they feel loved in the way they need to, because I'm recognizing that we are often act on what's intuitive for us, but what's intuitive for me is what a woman would do. I'm not with a woman, I'm with a man. And it took me a while to recognize that they think differently, they act differently, they are different. And that's helped me now just trust that everything that I took personally before, there's probably a good reason for why they do it, and to be curious about that why. And to test myself that my triggers doesn't mean danger. They simply means it's just the triggers that can, if anything, just trigger a question that answers the question, and it's fine. But if I was going to answer it in short after a very long explanation, it would be identify what I want and be honest with myself about what that is, and consistently be curious about asking for what I want, but also curious about what my partner wants and what it will provide for them to that I give that to them and vice versa. Yeah. Do you feel like I answered that question?
No, very much. And if let's go back and just ask the question of how does attachment develop? So when we're babies and we cry, we feel uncomfortable, we need our diaper changed, we feel hungry, we're cold. All we can do is cry. That's all we
Yeah.
can do. We have no power to do anything. So we cry, and this person comes in and tries to assess what we need. Do you need your diaper changed? Are you hungry? That they try to assess what we need, and they look at us and they focus on us, and then they try to do whatever it is that will make us feel better. They basically soothe us. And that word soothe is an interesting word because it means whatever's bothering us, they help it to feel better. So the back and forth is somehow we communicate what we need, and they then can soothe us. They can then provide what it is we need.
Yeah.
Now, if a child never experiences that, for example, children that are raised in orphanages, they may not ever experience that reciprocal. I say that I need something, they soothe me. And then they don't begin to believe that anybody's going to help them. They can say whatever they want, but nobody will ever come back and help them feel better. And
Mm.
so they don't feel like they can trust anyone. They don't feel like they can attach to anybody. They don't feel that way. And that becomes an attachment rift. Now,
Yeah.
with you as an adult, your challenge, all of our challenges, all of us have the challenge of what do I need? What is the need that I have? I can change my own diaper. I can feed my own self. I can make myself warm. What is it that I need then?
Yeah.
Uh, and then being able to communicate that to somebody who can offer it in a way that soothes us, helps us feel comfortable. Now, I don't know what the relationship with you and your mom was, but somehow she would soothe you.
Yeah,
She
she
would
did. She
help you
still
feel
does.
comfortable. She still does. And that need to have a mom there that did that, that was so important.
Yeah.
And the fear that maybe that would be gone created anxiousness.
Mm.
I suppose what creates security is as we get better and better at meeting some of those needs ourselves and being confident that the other person that matters to us will meet those needs that we can't meet ourselves.
Yeah.
That's hard to find in relationships.
Yeah, I think what is very intriguing and very new to me in the experience that I'm currently in with my boyfriend is that, well, it's also the first time I'm dating someone that I knew well, in the sense that we've known each other for 2 years before we started dating. We also lived together, so we know what it's like to be roommates. But the first indicator that was the greatest shocker for me was when we first ever stepped over that threshold from friendship to lovers, essentially. Well, I mean, we became a couple first, but over that threshold, anyways, you know what I'm talking about, from friendship to dating, is that I had never, like, I'd gotten like hugs from him before. It was different. It was just like friendly. But the first time I ever was in his arms, like we were cuddling and I was in his arms, what I immediately noticed that had never happened to me was that my entire nervous system regulated. And I know this because I was PMSing that morning. Like a couple of days prior to my like for my period. Is it the luteal or the follicular phase where we're the most sensitive right before our periods? And so I was already on edge and I was feeling this emotional turmoil. So it was very present. But immediately as I was in his arms, all of that just regulated and I was at peace. I never felt that safety before. And what's consistently been true for the 6 months that we've now been dating is that I feel peaceful. I inherently trust him, and there's no danger in bringing up whatever it is that I want to talk about. There's no alarm going off in either part of us. It's just a safe space to communicate openly what it is that I need. And that peace, that being in love without anxiety, brand new. I've never had that before.
No, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And that you have a secure attachment with him.
I do have a secure attachment with him because he allows me to exercise it. Because when I tell him about what's on my mind, what would happen in the past is that I would be met with resistance. I would be met with an eye roll or here we go again. This is exactly why I don't have a girlfriend. Now your problems are my problems. Now all of a sudden, me asking for my need has become dangerous because it's not met with compassion. But whereas now I say what I need and I get it. So it's like a completely different experience. But so what this is allowing me is also bringing it out of me. But I don't know if I changed or if the men that I surround myself changed. I think maybe a combination of both. But nonetheless, I'm grateful I get to experience that relationships and vulnerability doesn't have to equals danger and risk in that way that it felt like before.
Very much. And so if we look at adopted children, many adopted children, and I would actually venture to say that most adopted children do grow into a secure attachment where they can trust their parents, they can trust themselves, they can feel comfortable that their needs are going to be met. It becomes very problematic in foster care
Yeah.
because in foster care, they have met with maybe a situation where they're fearful of their adoptive of their parents and maybe their foster parents, they become fearful, and that type of an attachment is extremely we call it an anxious avoidant
Yeah.
attachment.
Yeah.
They anxiously want to connect, and yet at the same time they feel very, very fearful and they want to stay away. And
Yeah.
so they're pulled between this I gotta stay away, I gotta stay away, I gotta stay. And so there it's a huge conflict inside of them. And so they'll bounce back and forth between needy and avoidant of the person. And that can create huge confusion for the person they're trying to attach to because they don't know, do you need me or are you trying to avoid me? And it creates and it's hugely confusing to the person themselves. Do I need them? Yes, I need them. Oh, I don't trust them. I can't be near them. And that type of attachment is really challenging and destructive. Have you ever seen that?
I actually do. I have a story in mind. Well, I don't know too
Okay.
much to what extent I can share so much because I bet what I'm realizing is that I have a person in mind, and it's one of my really great friends. She essentially doesn't have any contact with either of her parents today as a result of a very troubling upbringing. And I don't know all the details of what happened, but I know that the coupling themselves was toxic, but there was also a lot of violence in the home, but they also are still together, so they're never really solving it.
Mhm.
So she essentially had to draw herself out of the situation because she is not safe there. She isn't safe in that environment because of the violence and the toxicity and the dynamic. So and she's openly talking about the fact that she has this, she calls it a scattered attachment style, but it is the same. It's just a different word for the same explanation. It's you're scattered between the two, right?
You don't know what you want. You just
Yeah,
don't know.
it's like you need the connection and you crave the connection, but you're terrified of needing it.
Mhm.
So I've had some conversations with her for sure, and also what she's talked about is that she doesn't want kids, she doesn't want to get married. It's like if it happens, cool, but if not, like I think that's maybe some of the things that breaks my heart so much, because she's so loving, so caring. She'd be an incredible mother and just a dope wife, and I would just love to see her lean into that. But I also understand that my view of what that looks like is the sunshine story. Her view of what that looks like is terror.
Right.
So yeah, so it is really interesting how all of our background shapes the way that we relate to love as we grow up.
And the hard part for her and for anyone who feels this type of longing and the need, and at the same time, very, very afraid of the connection, is to have someone that they can, over time, begin to trust,
Mhm.
where they can begin to feel vulnerable, and that that person upholds that trust. Now, the hard part is to uphold the trust of someone like that, you have to be willing to put up with their schizophrenic type attitude. They become so, because it's sort of like they trying to hug you and pound against you at the same time they're trying to
Yeah.
hug you.
Yeah.
And being able to tolerate that long enough that they can feel that they can trust at least somebody in the world. And if they can learn to trust somebody in the world, then just like you experienced when you were in the arms of your boyfriend, they can actually become re-regulated,
Yeah.
where they think, oh, it is possible to feel secure with somebody.
Yeah.
That's hard to come by for some people.
Yeah. I'm noticing too that a ripple effect of kind of what you just explained too is that it's as if I want to look out for myself in a different way. It's as if I want to understand myself better so I can be like a better service to him. So, I mean, I know that maybe my choice of words might alarm some people, but it's really true for me that, and I'm also understanding that maybe it's just a part of being a woman is that we want to be pleasing. But I really want to understand how I can be pleasing to my partner as like a man and not the way that I interpret it from a view of a woman. And the more I get to know myself better, the more I understand how much bandwidth I have for love, but I also feel great purpose in wanting to spread love and talk about love and be vulnerable about love and be loud about love because there's nothing greater than
Than
experiencing
love.
it. Yeah, I mean, what I find beautiful about this, and my brother also told me this once, because there's many times that I've been afraid of being judged from just jumping from relationship to relationship as if I'm incapable of being alone. For me, the goal was never to be alone. So of course I would,
So why be alone?
yes.
I mean, go and
So,
get in another relationship.
yeah, I think what I needed to understand in so I had some process of solitude, not necessarily for like years and years, but like for many months, I would find some solitude so I could hone in on what I actually wanted and needed better because it was more evident what was lacking. Um, when you have some distance from it all. But essentially, it's nice to feel happy. It's really nice to feel happy and to be able to show that from someone else. But I mean, the X factor here is not having any anxiety attached to it as it's going on.
And that takes a long time to
Yeah,
come. Because even if you were married for 50 years, even though you feel maybe totally secure in a marriage, well, eventually they're going to die, and or one of you. And so then that separation.
yeah,
And so that eventually can be problematic unless there's a faith that there's a continuity even beyond death that makes you feel secure with that.
yeah. Going back a little bit more to like the adoption process and what that is like for a developing brain, because I mean, I'm sure maybe I suppose you can share whether or not you're dealing with many different ages here, or if they're typically really like they're typically newborns when they arrive at a new home. If anything, is there a difference between their coping with that transition?
Yeah, for sure. And I of course can't speak for all adopted children. I can say this, all adopted children, the nature of adoption is that they will leave one set of parents
Mm.
and go to another set of parents. And in foster care, you may see that happen multiple times. And the more often it happens, the more likelihood there is that it sets a pattern in their brain that says, it's not safe for me to attach to this person
Mm.
because that attachment won't endure.
Mm.
And that belief, it's not a cognitive belief. It's far more somatic than it is cognitive. There's just a defensiveness that the child will develop just naturally to
Mm.
defend themselves against pain.
Right.
Um, my youngest son, he came to me when he was 2 years old.
Mm.
And I remember his birth mom said to me when she was bringing him to me, she said, "Oh, by the way, you'll need to get a tent. He sleeps in a tent." And I thought, oh, okay, a tent. And so I went out and I bought one of those little play tents that kids play in and stuff. And I had it there. And when she came, she saw it. She goes, "Oh, that's not going to do." I said, "Oh, okay." She says, "You need a camping tent, a tent that zips up." And so I went and got a little pup tent that zipped up, and he went in at nighttime and he got in his little tent and he zipped it up. And I would zip it down and look at him and say, "You okay?" And he'd zip it back up again. And the only way he could sleep was to be in that enclosed, safe, zipped up tent. Now, I don't know why. I don't know all the reasons that led him to only feel safe, totally blocked off from
Mm.
anything, but that's where he was. That we could call as an unattached child. The other aspect of it is that a child like that, in fact, I remember her saying, "He's a runner." And I said, "He's a runner?" And she said, "Yeah, he will run." And I didn't know exactly what that meant, but I soon found out. He would run away. Most children, if you're walking through a store and you're walking along and you're looking at whatever, they'll just follow along behind you. And you'll turn around and you go, "Oh, there they are." And they stay with you. He wouldn't. He would run away. And so if I was not with him or holding his hand or something and I got distracted, he would be gone. And then
Mm.
I would have to go hunt him down. He would unlock every key to every door. He just could get out and he would run. And
Mm.
I never quite understood why he did that, except that there was no attachment. So over time, my job was to attach to him. And so I would do little things like I eventually cut a little hole in the tent and I would stick my finger in it and sort of play with him through the little tent. And I would let him begin to tear at the hole until eventually we could look at each other through the hole and he would feel safe and yet we could still begin to connect. And
Mm.
it took a few months for him to get to the point where he could sleep without being in a tent. Now, it takes time. And if you were to ask this little 2-year-old boy how he felt, he would have no idea how to describe what he felt.
No.
He wouldn't, but the emotions and the feelings were still there. Well, he's an adult now. And some of those, we of course feel like we're attached, but some of those tendencies are still there. We bought an RV and parked it in the backyard so that he can live in the RV and still be with our family
Oh.
and yet still feel safe, but still feel his place. And the challenge in attaching, at least as a parent to a child, is trying to assess what is their need
Yeah.
and recognizing it and then providing that in such a way that it soothes us. And I suppose that's the challenge with us in any relationships we're in.
You said that you had three adoptive children.
I do.
Did you what age did you get the other two?
I was there when they were born. Now,
Okay.
does it make a difference? I think to some degree, for sure.
Yeah.
I think it makes a difference.
Yeah.
And but one of the challenges in adoption is that trust. And so if I could say anything to any adopted parents or anybody, it would always be honest and never tell them something that's not true. And so what that means is that at an early age, they recognize they're adopted. They recognize that they have this relationship and then provide opportunities for them to explore the other relationships if they want. So
Yeah.
that's one of the keys.
What is your experience with, to what degree they come to terms with the fact that they were essentially let go of, although in many cases for a better opportunity of a great life, of course, all many reasons, very often is for good reason. But even though it's a good reason, doesn't mean that it doesn't make a mark on them. What's
For
your
sure.
experience with that?
Well, one of my experiences is my oldest son at one point was kind of struggling.
Mm.
And so we went to a counselor. And I don't know, I think he was probably 8 or 9 at the time. So we went to the counselor, and the counselor, we walked in, and she said, "Why don't you go ahead and step out and let me talk to him alone?" I said, "Great." And so I stepped out, and it was not 30 seconds till she called me to come back in. And I thought, what did he say in that 30 seconds that she needed me to come back in to address? And so I went back in, and she said, "Your son would like to know why his mother, his biological mother, placed him for adoption and kept his older brother." So that
Oh,
message, and he never had felt like he could ask me directly. So we had to get some additional help in order for him to be able to express that. And I, of course, was prepared to answer that question, and I did. But that knowing the story, knowing our story, whatever it is, whether it's good or bad, whether it's painful, whatever it is, knowing our story is so important, and knowing it honestly. And since that time, of course, as the years have gone by, he's had the opportunity to meet his biological mom and his
mm.
biological father and his biological brother, and has relationships with them, and certainly now understands why they made the decision that they made, and is glad for the life that he has. But that doesn't in any way take away from the importance of knowing, having the opportunity to express the pain, recognizing that there is confusion and pain, and then helping them move through that in the sense that they feel secure in their new life.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a powerful story. And what a heartbreak. I mean, of course, he will wonder that, and maybe to some extent even feel guilty about wanting to know that, because I'm sure he feels so much love and gratitude for what you provided. And well, I'm assuming now that you're also having a husband that you're going through this with, or a partner that you're going through this with.
I, I actually adopted as a single
Oh,
mom.
you did.
I did,
Oh,
which
wow.
is challenging in and of itself, um,
Yeah.
and not something I never I would normally recommend. But in this case, it's been fine,
Okay.
and that's part of my children's story is to have that challenge too, including experiencing the challenges of when I'm dating. And
Right.
that can become even more challenging
Yeah.
for children and for everybody.
Are you, now I'm curious, are you currently dating someone? Yeah, so you have a partner in your life. That's
And they
nice.
have their opinions on it.
Yeah,
They
I'm
share
sure.
and they share their opinions, which is
They take care of you.
it,
They want to protect you. It's their
well, they do.
instinct.
They
Yeah.
do. And they've been the kind of the men in my life for their whole lives, and
Yeah.
they have some strong feelings about anyone that I date. And
Yeah.
sometimes those have been helpful, and sometimes not so helpful.
Yeah.
But there's many different kinds of families, and the important thing in attachment is recognizing that regardless of the circumstances of our lives, we're totally committed to each other.
Yeah.
And I am totally committed to them. And they
Yeah.
know that I am totally committed to their well-being and providing them the things that they need, including sometimes difficult growth, which your mom experienced in sending you away and letting you go on adventures,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
and experiencing, loss of her being right there so that you could become stronger.
Yeah, I know for a fact that that was a sacrifice for sure. I mean, I'm right now actually I made the decision of yeah, June last year, I think it was, I made the decision to move back to Norway. I've lived in San Francisco like kind of on and
Oh,
off for the last 7 years. And yeah, I spent most of my life in the US, most of my 20s in the US, doing first my bachelor's degree, then my master's degree, and working and living and working in the US for many years. So
what
I
did you get your degrees in?
I got my degree in international business for the simple reasons that I had no idea what I wanted to do. I just knew that I wanted to be in the US. I know the more I think about all of my choices in terms of education and all of that, it's just I'm Norwegian. It was just ingrained in our life path. It's healthcare and education is for free. So naturally, you go to all the steps of school, and but I gravitated towards the US. And when I first moved there to be an exchange student during my bachelor's degree, I felt the sense of belonging for the first time in my life because I have a very outgoing personality. I dream big, I envision big, and I needed to allow myself to feel big. But in Scandinavian culture, we have this underlying concept that's called the law of Jante. And
Mm.
essentially, it's meant to humble people, but what it also does is paralyze us a little bit and adds judgment that shouldn't be there. Just to give you some example of what that might look like, there's 10 rules, and one of them sounds like you're not to think you're anything special. You're not to think that you're better than anyone else. You're not to think that you can do what we can't do, etc., etc. So essentially, you're not supposed to take up too much space. And so for me to come into the US was the first time I ever felt that sense of belonging. And many of my decisions was how can I come back and stay longer? And education was an easy way to get a visa. So I just kept coming back. But I guess it was a kind of the right path for me anyways, though, because I had a very entrepreneurial mindset, and just being in the US allowed me to dream big and be bold, and that's what led me to taking a leap of faith and starting my podcast and writing my book, which I'm currently in the process of, and just tapping into my creativity and not be so afraid of it. So it's
Yeah.
been interesting moving home to Norway with that personality, but also very liberating.
Well, and the United States is we're everything. We're the biggest. We're the
Yeah.
we have kind of the opposite personality, which sometimes can become very problematic.
I mean, there's
Well,
pros and cons to everything, I suppose, but to confirm what you initially said, yes, it was a sacrifice for my mother, and I'm incredibly grateful for all of the love and endurance that both of my parents put into to that to allow me to be all of what I wanted to be. And it was certainly wasn't easy. But I have one question because when you were talking, there was something that triggered my mind about what you were saying, knowing that you raised is it all three sons?
mhm,
Yeah. As a single mother, have they ever voiced any, or have you observed to any degree if they missed a masculine figure at all? Has that ever been, or like, not, I'm not saying like a man
oh no,
necessarily, but
no.
you know what I mean? Yeah.
Oh, no, without a doubt.
Hmm.
Without a doubt, certainly. I have some amazing brothers that came in and helped. I also live in a neighborhood with some amazing men
Mm.
that
Love that.
were very much a part of their lives. All of them played sports. Well, my youngest one didn't as much, but and so they had their coaches and things like that. But no, I could not provide them all that they needed as far as a father goes. And do they regret that? Well, if you were to ask them, they'd all say the same thing. Oh, mom, we're fine. That
Mm.
they'd all say the same thing. We're fine. You know, uh, we all get raised in the ways we get raised,
Yeah.
and we have to learn to adapt it. Do I think that they missed out? Sure. Of course they missed out on many things, but they would say, "Oh, mom, we're fine."
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, they have life. They got life. They got a good life too. So, of course, they will look at it that way. How old are they? Are they in dating age at all, any of them?
oh yeah, no, my oldest is 26 and he's very much dating somebody. In fact, we had a conversation this morning about him marrying her, and I like her a lot, and I think that would be good. Uh,
Oh,
he has some attachment struggles and he gets scared, but she's very patient with him.
mm,
Um, my second one, he struggles with attachment.
yeah.
He's quite attached to me, but he struggles with, interestingly, his birth father did not know that he existed.
Mm,
Um, I knew of his birth father, but didn't have any way of reaching him. And then his birth mother died. And so, I didn't think much more of it until I got a call from a man who said that he had gone on and had done DNA tests and was looking for his brother and found that his DNA matched with someone as though he was a half, and he assumed that was his brother. So he reached out and found out it wasn't his brother, it was his son.
oh my
And
goodness.
so he contacted, well, actually, his wife contacted me and told me the story. And I was thrilled. I was thrilled. I thought this was amazing. And so I got to know them and a little bit and saw that they were just amazing people. And then went to my son and told them the story. And he immediately shut it down. He said, "Mom, I'm not interested at all." I was actually disappointed. I thought, honey, here's a man that looks like you, that has similar characteristics to you, and wouldn't it be nice for you to have a relationship? And he did not want it at all.
Mm,
Now, I don't think that will always stay that way. I've
right.
talked with enough adoptees to know that they go through periods of time, and my son's still in his early 20s, and he's still trying to figure himself out. And the time may come where that will change. And I told him, I said, well, I'm going to maintain a relationship. And if you ever want it, then that will be there. And then I had to go back to this man and tell him. And he was understandably quite disappointed because
Mm,
he never had any children. And
yeah.
so for him, this was an opportunity. But my son's not ready for that.
Mm,
So they each struggle in their own way, as do we all, as
yeah.
do we all.
Oh my goodness. Wow. What a powerful story. I do kind of hope though that maybe one day they will feel ready for it, even if just for some sort of like closure or healing purposes, because I mean there's something I can only imagine. I mean, I just know what it's how impactful it's been to kind of unpack my own life for good and for bad. But more often, I find that the more I get to know myself better, the more agency and control I have over my anxiety too. Because the more compassion I can have with where everything is coming from and just the biology that happens as we grow
It
up.
does. It happens.
Yeah, it just happens. And I think that it gives me more leverage. It gives me more control. And
Mm.
as much as I would probably want to tell your son what my brother told me once, and because I kind of tapped into it a little bit earlier when I lost my train of thought, but it was essentially that I felt like I was jumping from relationship to relationship a lot, as if I couldn't be alone. But the truth is also I knew what I wanted, and what he said to me once is that like, well, at least you're brave enough to jump into it again and again, even though you know the risk of how much it
That
hurts.
that I agree with your brother, to
Yeah,
have the courage to just keep trying until you find what you want
yeah, because it's
and what matches
painful.
you. Hmm.
Yeah, it's so painful potentially to be in love, but it's I think it's risk versus reward, right? I found that the reward of love, which you essentially get to feel in one capacity or the other when you are dating too, is it's remarkable, it's beautiful. But of course, there's always this responsibility that comes with it too, because you need to learn how to communicate effectively, how to show up in a way that is productive. And that is hard when you're not trying. You're never going to know how much you grew unless you're in a situation that is going to confront you about what you learned. Did you learn or not? So yeah, it is something brave about putting yourself out there, even when it is scary and you feel vulnerable. And yeah, it's intimidating.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for having me. I've
Yes, thank you so
appreciated
much
you.
for being here, Donna. I feel like I'm learning so much, and I just genuinely enjoyed this conversation with you. Is there anything we haven't talked about already that you want to talk about?
No, I think we have. The adoption community is challenging because it is around loss. There is loss that's
Mm.
inherent in the adoption community. Adoptive families have felt loss because they couldn't have biological children. Birth parents feel lost because they place a child for adoption. Adoptees feel lost because they have had that separation. So there's loss everywhere in it. And sometimes in the adoptive community, we stay focused on that loss rather than what you even did, look at the gain and
Mm.
look at what we get. And what we get is yes, with that separation, we hopefully get a unitedness with another family.
Yeah.
And in time, with the increasing openness in the adoption community, many times we can end up as adoptees with
Mm.
multiple families. And for example, my oldest son, he has I wouldn't say as strong a relationship as he has with me, but he certainly has a good relationship with his biological mother and with his biological father. And that in and of itself gives him a unique perspective.
Mm.
Uh, he knows me, he knows them, he spends time with them. And if there is, if there's, I call it the tug of war. If you don't create a tug of war, um, then you can create a cohesiveness that
Mm.
allows the child to feel very, very secure and
Yeah.
very attached. One of the challenges never to create this tug of war because then their ability and their confidence to attach in multiple directions gets damaged and we just can't do that. So
Yeah.
that's all I have.
Thank you so much. And if there's anyone who is considering adopting or is in a situation like that, or maybe even have been adopted one day and they would like to reach out to you to talk to you about anything that you might know, or maybe you can help them in any way, shape, or form, how can they reach you?
You just put my information. They can reach me at Heart to Heart Adoptions. We are in the process of developing an adoption platform.
Mm.
And what the idea of this adoption platform is that adoptive families, biological parents, adoptees, along with counselors, adoption agencies, foster care systems, attorneys, anybody that provides services or needs services in the
Mm.
adoption community can come together and find each other. We hope to have that up by the latter part of this year and make that available to people anywhere, not just the United States, but anywhere, and allow this connection to happen. We're calling it Adoptions, Community, and Connections, is what we're calling it.
Awesome.
And so eventually that will be available too.
Awesome. Thank you so much for everything that you do, Donna. It's really, really beautiful, your mission. And thank you so much for sharing everything. It's been great
Thank,
getting to know you.
thank you very much.